I'd like to start today by saying that I'm changing most of my lecture today from Expressionism Part 2 to 1/4 of 1 hour to Expressionism Part 2 to 3/4 talking about the history of clarinet mouthpieces. I don't know how many people here are familiar with The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce. The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce. And I came about it when I finished a concert one day. A student in New York, from Juilliard, came up to me after a performance of the Ingolf Dahl Clarinet Sonata, and he gave me this as a little present, and I didn't know how to take it. But as it turns out, it's a great definition of the clarinet. It's spelled C-L-A-R-I-O-N-E-T, noun. An instrument of torture operated by a person with cotton in his ears. There are two instruments that are worse than a clarinet. Two clarinets.
Oh, help.
So I felt a necessity to read this to you today, since we always get so caught up in trying to make the sounds always so beautiful, and we're always talking about the aesthetic qualities of clarinet playing. It's sometimes to take a chuckle at the whole picture also. And if anybody would like to have the quote, it's by Ambrose Bierce, The Devil's Dictionary. The second thing, I've been asked by about 50 people here, and I've really been very touched by the fact that people cared about what I said about metronomes. And the metronome that everybody's very interested in is that one that's calibrated on the number 7. And it's Tempo Watch, 828 Pearl Street, Boulder, Colorado. Pearl. Once again, Tempo Watch, 828 Pearl Street, Boulder, Colorado.
Any zip noted? Any zip?
No, I don't have the zip. I had a zip the other day. 80302. On the metronome they had it. Yes, sir.
If I could just mention, if anyone's in a big hurry, 2 of us are going there this afternoon to get one. If you want to give us money, we'll be glad to get one for you.
How much are they?
Well, they're very expensive. I think it cost me about $38. But it's a lifetime investment. And I really feel that it will give you great dividends in the long run. Going on, I wanted to tell you, I noticed that all of the Ingolf Dahl sonatas that the Leibens had on display were sold, which is very nice to see because it shows an interest in 20th century clarinet literature by a great American composer. The work I performed in October was the opening concert at the Cooper Union College in the Village in New York, and the auditorium was very good to play in, and I attracted many of the Village musicians, meaning Greenwich Village. And I enjoyed that program very much, and I brought with me a concert tape of the performance that evening. I would like to tell you a couple of things about the Ingolf Dahl Sonata. It was commissioned, which is really incredible, by the Iowa Clarinet Group, which I know nothing about, but I commend them for their work. And Thomas Ayres, if that's the correct pronunciation.
I was one of the members in that group.
Were you one of the members?
17 of us gave $10 apiece.
So he only got us $170.
That was a bargain.
I wish he didn't tell me that.
The understanding was that we were all college clarinet teachers, and he thought that he was interested in that many university clarinet teachers being interested in him rather than he thought more people would play. You're a student.
Wonderful. Now I feel better. $170. That doesn't even pay for the paper today.
Let alone the pen.
Well, anyhow, the work was performed a couple of times on the West Coast, I know, and I'm sure it received several other performances. And last year, we released it at Browdy, and there are a few things, tempos, that I would like to say that are not correct. Some of the tempos are a little bit too fast. If anybody would like me to just tell you what I think the correct tempos are from the performances that I did. The first movement, called Alla Machia, is marked 126 to 132, and I like it somewhere just a little bit faster than 120. There's no indication for a slowing up of the tempo at the trio, but it calls for a slight slowing up of the tempo, because Ingolf Dahl had such beautiful sonorities in mind that they just get passed over if the tempo is at the 132. So the opening tempo I take just a little faster than 120, and the trio I slow down a trifle. Then I return to the opening tempo at the Come Primo. And the work calls for a tremendous amount of dynamics in the first movement. In fact, he uses the term quasi tromba to sound like a trumpet. There are some spots where he wants the kind of articulation that's very bright and brilliant. And at the same time, in a very, very difficult fashion, he writes espressivo caloroso. And yet, it's very hard to get the expression in because the melodic line is going into very, very strange intervals. Not quite 12-tone, but going through very, very unique intervals. And the relationship with the piano, you never feel a beat. If I showed you the clarinet part in the first movement, it doesn't look very difficult. But if I show you the piano part with the clarinet part, you'll say, And when you hear it, you'll see what I mean. You never have a sense of confidence from the piano part because it's not an accompaniment. It's in the truest sense an integrated sonata. The second movement is marked romanza. I would like to say this is very interesting. I think that the Poulenc clarinet sonata influenced this sonata. You will hear a lot of influences in the second movement. In fact, the movement ends very much like the Poulenc sonata. And ironically, it's also called romanza. And Dahl was a very, very intense teacher, conductor, composer, and he had a great gift for making each movement hold together, but yet making each one a world within itself. Like the first movement is very, very, very casual. The second movement is an intense romanza, in the sense of a 19th century romantic word. And also it calls for techniques of playing that are quite difficult. In a very slow tempo, even eighth notes in the piano. And the clarinet part has 4 dotted 16th notes against those slow eighth notes. I wish everybody would visualize this. 4 dotted 16th notes against 3 even eighth notes. And that's the same amount of time. The only way we were able to rehearse that to get it even, it seems so simple. Why can't you just go da dee da da and the 3 eighth notes da dee da? It doesn't come out because it's 4 against 3. And to place the 4 accurately against the 3, we must subdivide to 32nd notes. When I was playing it, I thought of breaking the dotted 16th note down to 3 32nds. So what I thought of was 4 3 32nd notes, which would come out looking like a dotted 16th. Then, after working on this concept, I looked back at the opening word for the movement, romanza. So I didn't want that. And I slowly, through months of rehearsing and thinking about it, I just eventually was able to sing on this very comfortable rhythm. By taking it down to this denominator, you learn the root of where the rhythmic problem is. Is there any question on this? The reason why I bring this up, you see this often in contemporary music, but in a very slow tempo, it's much harder than in a very fast tempo. In a fast tempo, I defy anybody to see through the problem immediately. In a slow tempo, boom, it sticks out like a needle in a haystack. Are there any questions about this? Well, the third movement, and I would have liked to have done a class on it, but it would have been unfair to any pianist to have to try and read it.
The tempo in the second.
Yes, the second movement is marked a dotted quarter note equals 50, and then underneath it's marked not slower than a dotted quarter note equals 50. And I liked it somewhere around 46, 48. Doesn't seem like a big difference, but it's a big difference. I'm not sure that these are Ingolf Dahl's tempo markings. That's the reason why I'm taking this liberty of using my own musical intuition to give these tempos. These were finished after Ingolf Dahl died by Larry Morton, who was a pupil of Ingolf Dahl at the University of Southern California. And it's a very haunting second movement. The third movement is marked quarter note equals 152. And quite honestly, if you could do it at 152, great. I took it just a pinch slower because some of the runs were just a little bit too awkward to reach the 152. I was somewhere in the 140 area. And the third movement, I'm going to play on the tape with the fourth movement. The third movement, Dahl was a very close friend of Igor Stravinsky. And you hear, in the very last part of the third movement, you hear sections from the Firebird. Very interesting, but it's very subtle the way you hear the influence of Stravinsky. And the last movement, and I don't know why it's called the Camera, because it's a big major sonata, pretty near 20 minutes in length. The last movement is an introduction, Giuda Finale, and it's very, very, very influenced by the Stravinsky jazz period, ragtime period. You will hear influence of La Histoire. And it's an incredibly exciting work, and there are some very interesting conversions and some very difficult polyrhythmic problems for the clarinetist and the pianist to work out. And I think most of you heard my pianist on Wednesday night, Peter Basquin. He's really a treat to work with, because once we discuss the tempo, it's incredible the way he just keeps to the tempo that we rehearsed, which is another problem. Rehearsing the tempo, getting into the concert, and then completely disregarding hours of discussing a tempo. Would you like me now to play the tape of the third and fourth movement?
Yes.
Because sometimes talking... Anybody like to follow the score? I wish I had more scores. That's the whole movement. The movement just goes by. Whimsical. Nothing to sit on. If you look at the score, who has the score? There's nothing to sit on in there. You know, the piano part just all of a sudden has bop, bop. And it's never in the spot where you expect it. And it's a very unusual piece in the sense that the last movement, after this, I try to make a very small pause when possible, because sometimes the timings between movements, it's so difficult in concert to sometimes do what you want to do, because swabbing out the clarinet and taking a breath, wiping off sweat, whatever you have to do, breaks sometimes the continuity. In this particular, I like the third movement to go directly into the fourth movement. In this concert, I don't know what I did, but I like it to grow out of that little whimsical character of the movement. And he marks hazy, indistinctly hazy. And I didn't know how literal to take it, but it's just so soft that you can play those passages before they don't speak. So keep that in mind when you see these recommendations by composers. They're not clarinetists. And from all the composers that I've worked with in the past 10 years, I've learned that many of them know very little about the clarinet. Some have a great feel for the instrument. And you as a clarinetist sometimes have to make decisions on your own, have to use your own experience and your own knowledge. How many people heard a little of the Firebird over there? You heard it? If you hear it a few times, keep going. If you hear it a few times, you hear, you know the last passage in one of the movies? It's very influenced by the Firebird. Now, I'd like to go on to the last movement, and you will hear the jazzy elements that Dahl was obviously introduced to from Stravinsky's ragtime period.
You said earlier you don't know why it was called Sonata di Che. The camera.
Yeah.
I studied the work at USC, and I knew him about Dahl. My teacher worked with him for dozens of years. We called it Sonata di Camera because it was a dance movement. In contrast to Sonata di Che, which doesn't. Back to the pre-growth concept. The romanza, if you take it to see that it's marked, is the Viennese waltz. And the last one, of course, is the jig. They're all dance movements except
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't find all the movements to be dance movements myself, but there is a dance quality, I think, throughout the whole piece. I don't really see where the waltz came into the second movement because of the long lines that he used. You always have a feeling of a long three.
It's always a three, except occasionally breaks it for 5 8.
Yeah, but I never heard a waltz that.
That's why it can't be slower than 50.
Well, that's why I like it at 48. Anyhow, let's go on. Here's some of it. But thank you. the ending, just where you want the piano to play, Ray can see over here, there's a rest, just where you want, he just makes it so uncomfortable, but it's very unusual. I mean, you have that kind of a feeling. It almost has a feeling of not being final, but very exciting in performance. Well, this work I think that everybody should at least have in their library and occasionally give it a reading. And in here, there was one section here that did remind me, by the way, of a Viennese kind of situation. The section in the last movement where it goes into the section dee-da-dum, 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 very much in a alla Rega style over there. Here I feel a very strong Viennese influence. And over there, quite honestly, that was one other tempo situation that Mr. Baskin and myself completely felt was just ridiculously fast, which I will discuss once I have a chance with Larry Morton. Perhaps that's what Mr. Dahl wanted, and then we will leave it alone. But in that section, in the fourth movement, before, it's called Pochissimo meno mosso. It's in the middle of the last movement. In that section, it's marked capriccioso. And if the tempo goes straight ahead at that 120, you come out dee-da-dum, 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 and you don't have no chance to get the charm of the music out and to listen to the sonorities. So again, here was a spot where I took it just a little bit slower to get the musical line across. Okay, are there any questions that anybody would like to ask about perhaps rehearsal techniques to put a work like this together? Or anything about Ingolf Dahl, his duets, or the Edward McDowell songs?
I take it that this is one of the places where you find that tempo watch to be invaluable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Invaluable. It helped a lot in this work.
Well, how did you block these out?
Well, we rehearsed it slowly till we were able to place all the notes and to feel comfortable, not to have to always be thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and 2, and 3. See, when you start thinking always like that, you think of note to note to note to note instead of thinking of the long line. And this is imperative to good interpretation, not to get always bogged down. It was very interesting, a rehearsal with Aaron Copland, watching the way he would just talk, and his meter changes are rather traditional, but they're hard to make them sound like it's very natural to you. And I thought Dr. Krillis did a great job of the sextet on Monday, which originally was his short symphony, reduced for that combination. And it's so important to feel a long line, even if it's simple, you know, the simple 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 and 1 and 1 and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Not to have to feel that ponderous feeling where you can feel da 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 dee dee da 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 ba da dee da da dee da 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 dee da da ba 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 be. If you go to a Greek wedding, Polish, Greek, and a couple others. But in Greek weddings, first of all, 9-star Metaxa is terrific. Anybody here drink Metaxa?
I don't even know what it is.
It's a honey brandy, a Greek honey brandy.
Oh boy.
And it comes in 3 different strengths: 9-star, 7-star, and 5-star. 5-star doesn't go down too smooth, but it's very nice. 7-star is pretty good, but 9-star just oozes down. And there's another drink called ouzo.
Heard of that.
And ouzo oozes also down. And I know that because I've oozed a lot of it down, especially before concerts of Ingolf Dahl. But now what the hell brought me to that? How did I get to that? Where was I?
Through rehearsing.
Oh yeah, rehearsing. Oh yes, about Greek clarinetist I was going to talk about. the Greek clarinetists, they're always playing in 7/8 time. They're always playing, and it's so natural. It's just, that's where you see how they just get up and they improvise in these 7/8 rhythms. To see Indian musicians, I saw a concert with Ravi Shankar, and they improvise like in 13/8 time. It's just so natural. Like we love, our favorite meter, 4/4, and C major. Oh boy, when I see 4/4 and C major, I get really happy. But to them, 13/8, 7/8, in the Bartok contrast to 5+8, that's all natural to them. It's all natural, and that's the way you have to approach modern music. And I don't mean modern music by the sense of experimental music. There's a difference between modern music and experimental music, which I could spend hours talking about. I receive dozens and dozens of scores every month, and experimental music will know in 20 years what it has to say. The people who are trying to play around with all kinds of new techniques. I personally, and I'd like to make this statement very clear, I do not like when the clarinet is abused. Several summers ago, while I was with Harold Wright, and we were talking about flutter tonguing, and we both just looked at each other and went, and that's by no means a contemporary technique. It goes back to the turn of the century. It's not necessary on a clarinet. We can argue this. This is strictly from my standpoint.
Well,
Yes.
I think I know for a fact that Harold Wright doesn't have the ability physically to flutter.
No, the reason that he doesn't like it is because, no, he does have the ability to do it. The reason that he doesn't like it is because it kills the reed. He feels that, and I also feel it when I have to do it, that it takes away certain overtones in the reed.
I went to a concert once where Morton Sobol played the album Variations, used the throat growl.
Yeah, that's what I do when I have to use flutter tongue. A gurgle. Does anybody have any different feelings about what I'm saying now, or any pro feelings?
More of a question, I guess. Wouldn't that be more like using the clarinet as a percussive instrument, and then why not?
Well, it's using it on flute. Flutter tonguing is very simple. I just feel that it's a technique that's not for the clarinet. I think that a lot of things can be demanded of the clarinet. All these difficult patterns I think are very important. I feel very strongly that all these patterns, these very technical pieces that you have to have in your repertoire, are important to have under your fingers in a traditional sense. But I still go back to the Berlioz Richard Strauss treatise on orchestration. And I read one sentence, the seductive member of the orchestra, as the Berlioz called the clarinet. And if you've heard Harold Wright play with the Boston Symphony, recently I hear that they had a broadcast of the Beethoven Sixth Symphony, you can feel that seductive quality. Many of you might know the name Ralph McLean. I mentioned it the other day, and quite a historical figure in the clarinet world. He was a teacher of a great many of the fine artists that are performing today, and he was a pupil of the great tradition of Rhodes. And I own many recordings of McLean, and one of the great recordings that he made that sums up my feelings of a basic clarinet sound and an approach to the instrument is The Pines of Rome, Respighi. It's on one of the first long-playing records, Columbia. How many people here heard that recording of Ralph McLean? Jerry? Well, I feel even if you have to travel to a library that owns it, well worth the lesson. The needle on your record player, when the clarinet comes in, vibrates when he comes in on that opening tone. His tone has so much energy and vibrancy. It's just an incredible experience. Another recording I have of McLean is the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony. Has anybody heard that recording, the old Philadelphia recording with McLean?
I haven't, but I'd sure like to.
I'm sure some other people would too. Well, I just can tell you this. In my record, there's a little slope in it from playing it so many times. The record starts out like that and then steps down. I listened to it and then I finally put it on tape. McLean comes in, you feel like he just does the whole solo on one breath, and he takes one breath in it, but even when he takes the breath, it's so incredible the way he spins the note a little further and takes the breath under the note while it's spinning in the auditorium. And when he comes in, la da dee da 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 dee da dum, da dee da da dee dum. My voice is not that good, but the melody of that Russian romanticism, and then when McLean comes in on that opening G on the clarinet, it's just incredible. The note vibrates without a vibrato. The clarinet is such a rich instrument that it's not necessary to employ vibrato at all times. And McLean used very little vibrato. The reason why I mentioned his name so much, because I think that it's being forgotten very quickly. And I think he stands for a style that has yet to be touched. Has anybody heard any Ralph McLean Philadelphia Orchestra records? Which one did you hear?
Oh, no, I was thinking of the Chanting.
Yeah, well,
Odyssey has the Prokofiev Fifth out, Eugene Ormandy.
and McLean's on it?
Yes.
Prokofiev Fifth. Let me just say one
They
thing.
have the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth.
Well, you can't be sure that they're all McLean, because on some of those recordings, which I thought was possibly McLean, that it was Portnoy or Bonnard.
Well, do you know Louis Bartolone?
Yeah.
He studied with Ralph McLean, and he verified it was Ralph
Good.
McLean.
Great. Well, why don't you announce what record that is?
It's the Prokofiev Fifth Symphony, Eugene Ormandy conducting, and it's on the Odyssey label, put out by Columbia Records. It only costs $3 too at Sam Goody's.
Good. And there's also the reissue of the old recording on Musicraft that Dick Gilbert did on Grenadilla Records of Ralph McLean doing the Brahms Trio with Milton Kay, who I just rehearsed with last week. He's the pianist in New York who I do concerts with, and he recorded it in 1937 with Ralph McLean. And he told me stories about the recording session, because in those days there was no mixing, there was nothing. It was just you go in and do it, and what comes out, comes out. And McLean was never pleased. Never pleased. In fact, McLean never liked an extraneous noise. Every pad on the clarinet, every legato, he expected to be the ultimate of legato. He wanted it to have the purity of the voice. Must sound like a voice. And have to have an incredible magic. The kind of magic that a clarinet can steal the show from an orchestra. A great clarinet sound can steal the show from a whole orchestra. Hearing a great sound in Oberon Overture, Weber, that solo could just steal the whole overture, frankly. And Die Freischütz can steal the show if the sound is glorious, if it has a golden kind of a quality. Words are not too important, because that you can get into a very strong argument about. So whatever I say is just the words that I use. But the sound of a pure, round, ringing, clear, rich clarinet sound. And to be able to get the ultimate of softness on the lowest notes without getting hiss and fuzz and extraneous sounds. And being able to make a note go into the musical term fumando, which comes from the Italian verb fumare. Smoke, like a fume. When smoke goes into the sky. It just dissipates and flows away. And just the way the smoke disappears, sometimes you have to be able to imagine the clarinet sound to come in the way the smoke is going out, and have the smoke grow again and go out again.
I've heard so many stories about McLean, and I wonder how he managed that.
Practiced 8 hours a day.
Yes.
And he also practiced old book number 1, close A. After being the great advanced artist, he goes back to book 1, close A, where 3-fingered C is held, 2 whole notes, 2 quarter notes, and then 3 beats rest. Again, like you teach your young students, they go back and try to get a perfect attack. 100 different kind of attacks. In fact, infinite amount of attacks. Iggy Janusa gave me a lesson once on open G. On open G, and talk about the mysteries of an open G. Dr. Tutil can bear what I'm saying about Mr. Janusa, the great artistry that he projects. And I heard while I was a student of Iggy Janusa a tape of the wonderful concerto that Dr. Tutil wrote for Iggy Janusa. And he would, before a concert, I remember before a Beethoven 8th in Baltimore, the year I was down there, he would spend 1 hour, Iggy, moving his chair around. He had an open G. Or let's talk about the opening, da 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 dum dee da da, and he would come in and he would sit in the chair. He'd have the reed he wanted. Never was he satisfied. He scraped his mouthpiece. If anybody knows stories about Iggy Janusa, 8 minutes before a solo, he'll take out a piece of sandpaper and start scraping on the tip of the mouthpiece, and I would be going like this. My heart would be palpitating, and he would look at me, and with his nose, he has a real Italian nose, and he would look at me and, Becky! And I'd be there, and then the first note would come in, and he'd be talking about that first note for a week, discussing a concept of sound, a concept of the deepest possible sound that you can hear from 100 miles within inside your guts. And then when he would come out, he'd be able to execute that, because he worked a lifetime at it. Stories about him at Curtis are incredible. All day he worked on sound, because through sound the tonguing came. Because his concept of tonguing was, if you support properly, the tongue is just an interruption. And to get a good bouncy staccato, very similar to a rich cello pizzicata, to get that real ping, that was the word he used to say to me in articulation. He used to go like this, it has to ping. And he would take a piece of, he would go through troubles and pains and talk about a fine piece of china. Cheap china, if you ring it, it goes gluck. Really fine china, when you ring it, it pings. It goes. And that's the way he described tonguing, as a little ping. Not taking a baseball bat and going pow, which so many clarinetists do. A delicacy, but yet it can be strong. The strength comes from the diaphragm. And also, a very interesting concept is when you tongue the reed on the mouthpiece, everybody uses sometimes a lot of strength on the attack. So as the reed goes in, they go strong. And in the release, there's a lazy release, or vice versa. You must think of a fiddle player using the strength, keeping that tension up and down. If you've seen great fiddle players play, or see a great fiddle player teach, he used the same tension going up as going down. Now obviously, when you're on the frog, you don't need to use that much tension because the sound is stronger, because it's the weight. But when the good fiddle player gets to the second half of the bow, he uses a little bit more intensity. And it's the same thing in using the clarinet, in tonguing, because tonguing is like bowing. A must for all clarinetists also is Leopold Mozart Treatise on Violin Playing. It's called The Fundamentals of Violin Playing by Mozart's father, Leopold Mozart. One chapter on bowing. One chapter on what I would call truth of phrasing, searching for a truth of phrasing. Talks about poor articulation. Very, very strong book. I recommend it to everybody. Oxford University Press publishes the book.
It's also excerpt in Strunk tertiary.
Is it? Interesting. And it talks also about poor articulation, but he uses naturally through violin techniques which can apply to the clarinet. Now, also, a wonderful recording of Harold Wright is the old recording, the first recording he made in the barn at Marlborough of the Shepherd on the Rock with Benita Valente and Rudolf Serkin. A great example of how to take a simple line and just make it sing. You might be able to get it on Columbia. It's been, obviously, all good recordings get deleted. They're just emptying out now. I think the warehouse is on them, so try and get it. A wonderful example of phenomenal articulation, wonderful phrasing, and just great artistry. There's a very wonderful recording that you might be able to get on Capitol Records with Dave Weber playing The Seasons by Alexander Glasunov. It happens to be like a clarinet concerto. In fact, one movement has a big clarinet cadenza. And also he recorded a great performance of the Shostakovich First Symphony with Stokowski and the Symphony of the Air on United Artists. Thank you. Very fine example of orchestral playing. Also, from that schooling of the Rose tradition. All of these artists that I have mentioned so far have played double lip. All of these musicians use the technique of double lip embouchure. I was fortunate enough when I was 8 years old, my first teacher in New York was a pupil of Hamelin. And he started me off on double lip when I was 8. And I don't know how it happened. It just seemed that every teacher I went to was a double lip player. I never thought about it, frankly, because I didn't know that there was a single lip. So for me, it was not from a remedial technique or it just teacher told me to put the lips on and I did it. No great mystery about double lip playing. And but I find it quite unusual that these sounds, for me, by the way, there are wonderful sounds all around the world. There are wonderful players that play without double lip. I don't even care, I just go by the sound. But to me, I find it quite unique that for my taste, the great sounds are the names that I just mentioned. And there are others that have wonderful sounds, but don't satisfy me to the ultimate standard. I love the sound and playing of Robert Marcellus. I love the playing of Mitchell Lurie. And there are other players that have very unique styles. For another former teacher of mine who played last night, Herbert Blayman, when he's in the opera orchestra playing a Wagner opera and Carillon comes in, there's no one that can do it better. There are different strokes for different folks. And in different situations, you must be very flexible. I keep this going in this thing I'm talking about in the Rose Hamlin tradition. They put great emphasis on legato playing. For some reason, I get the feeling that most people think legato means slow. Legato does not mean slow. It has nothing to do with tempo. Legato is a style of bringing one note to the next. Whether you're playing fast or slow, you must have a wonderful legato. And it always can be improved. It can always be improved. A singer will always say to you, in a big interval, 2 notes. Sit on the bottom note. Let the top note grow out of the bottom note. So when you're singing da 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 da, you have that bottom note to sit on, so the top note just spins out of the lower note. Because inside the vibration of that lower note is that top note. In that note is that in the overtone series. So when you just do it like a singer, da-ee, da-ee, when you have to do that, you don't have to think like a singer with all those words, nasal resonance, head voice. The clarinet has such a rich sound that it has it inside. And when you play these kind of intervals, you let it grow out of that bottom note, no matter what the interval is. Now, I go one step further because I think I've mentioned people that I admire greatly, among many others. I spent some time with Rudolf Yettel in Austria, and he had his unique kind of playing. All kinds of extraneous noises. I couldn't even get a sound out of his clarinet. He plays that, I think he had a Wurlitzer clarinet. It's not the same company, though, as that toy organ and organs. Different company. But his mouthpiece, he used the string. And his reed, it was so long and close. I felt like the opening was this long. I just couldn't get a sound out of it. And he picked it up and played for me, and I tell you, it was an incredible experience. He played the Rosenkavalier. And he would just do it with such a great flair. I never heard an American clarinetist do that. Strauss is in his blood. He just feels that. He just felt it, like we feel Frankfurters. And he just was incredible when he played that the Rosenkavalier. But yet, it had none of the things I was talking about, the incredible legato, the incredible singing delicacy. His English was broken. And in one lesson, we studied the Brahms E-flat Sonata. And I wish I brought it here, because he was a student, Rudolf Yettel was a student of Richard Mufield's star student. And I have his name written down in New York, which is not important because he was a transitory teacher and player. And Yettel told me a very funny story about this man playing the Brahms Sonata when he was about 14 years old for Brahms. And I'll just relate it to you because it's also part of Expressionism. Now I'm not talking about 20th century, I'm talking about just Expressionism. Yettel's teacher, who was the pupil of Mufield, was really cocky about playing the Brahms sonatas for Brahms. Frankly, if Brahms was here, I wouldn't want to play them for him. I don't think many of us would want to. But he played it for Brahms. And Brahms said, after the performance was over, he said, lots of fingers, in essence. And then the way he tried to explain it to me, Yettel, was, because I don't speak the little German that I do understand, when it gets mixed up with Austrian, I was totally lost. So Yettel, who's a man, I would say, in his 70s, and quite a composer, if you've played some of his works or his studies. I know Stanley Hasty was one of the first people to use his method books in this country, and now they're being widely used. He just said to me very simply, he called his wife, Yettel, I remember, it was in Salzburg, you know, right where Mozart was born, and I was in his little apartment, very humble apartment, and I walked in and I played for him, and then he told me this story, and he said, after my teacher played it for Brahms when he was a young man, and he couldn't go no further, couldn't explain what he meant, so he called his wife, and then his wife really didn't help too much, and then he opened his shirt, and I was not sure what he was doing. He was opening his shirt, Rudolf Yettel, and he pointed to his heart. I thought he was having a heart attack. I really didn't know what he meant. I mean, I never had a teacher do that, and when he did that, he opened up, and he said to me, Brahms said, nicht schmerzen. Anybody speak German here?
Right.
No? No pain in the heart when you play my music. And he says, get in love and be hurt and feel life. And then play it for me again in 40 years. And when that was told to me, I'll never forget that story as long as I live. It was incredible. I mean, just first of all, I felt near Brahms, being over in the area where he spent so much time, and being where Mozart was born, and Yettel spent over 20 years playing second clarinet to Leopold Bloch. He was second clarinet in Vienna Philharmonic next to Leopold Bloch. Very close friends with him. The two of them were the foremost Austrian teachers, and Bloch was a great artist also. But this story, I hope, has some relevance and impact to you, professional artists and students. Now, getting back, I did want to show one thing to you, the clarinet case that Leopold Bloch designed. That was made for me in Vienna. That's why I asked everybody to come up close. This was all, how many people, anybody own one of these?
No, but I've been looking for one for 2 years.
Well, he's 91 years old, the man. His name is Johannes Vannes. His address is 48 Antoniengasse, Austria. I don't know if he's still alive even. I remember his address because across the street was the finest Viennese bakery. And I really love eating. But these Viennese pastries were so good. Have you ever seen Viennese pastries with schlag on it? For breakfast.
Whipped cream.
And whipped cream is schlag, very rich whipped cream. And in the bakery, they would serve coffee free. It was incredible. I knew that address. I'll never forget it. But anyhow, now, it's Metaxa, Uzu, French. Oh, I'll get to that last. But Viennese pastries. But what I respect about the old world is respect for quality. This case was handmade. Very few 20th century tools Johannes owned. He was, when I was there, it was 4 or 5 years ago, so he was about, 85, and he had a motorcycle. And I was with another musician, a bassoonist in New York, and he took me up to the man who made Moray reeds. And I went up to his house. He lived on the 6th floor. He's a saxophonist, a freelancer, doubler in Vienna. And I went up to his house, and Rudolf Yettel went on his motorcycle, and I was in my rented car, and we drove. And he would be zooming. He was a real little man with round glasses, and he would jump on it, and he would take off, and he would bring me over to the house. And the man who makes Moray reeds lives on the top floor of an apartment house, about the 5th floor. And Yettel not yet, Johannes Vanus, the man who made this case, jumped 2 steps at a time, and he was up on the 4th floor, and I was on the 2nd floor. I was so pooped out. By the 5th floor, I was dying, and he looked at me, Vanus, and my friend also was a little pooped, and he looked at us, and he didn't speak any English, and he just went like this, "Fat youth." That was the only word. Yeah, young. You know, he was just saying, you have to be alive and be able to jump up the stairs. And then when we get up to the 6th floor, the man wasn't home. And I thought I'd be able to at least sit down on the top floor, and take a rest. And then Vanus jumped down 4 steps at a time, and he was back down on his motorcycle. I was running. I couldn't even get my keys, and the car stalled, and he was already 4 gosses up. Well, anyhow, I didn't show you the thing that he made. He made an incredible case for me. And first of all, nobody uses ornate silver hinges anymore. They perfectly lock in. Everything today never locks right. when I get back to New York, there's not a good clarinet case anymore. They all pop open all the time. Nobody wants to take the time to get really expensive hinges. And they lock in just incredible. All hand done. And if anybody up here, all this leather was hand carved, hand stretched, not old 20th century. This is going to relate to this clarinet talk, because this is a standard of quality. And he made this for 12 reeds, and I fit 11 in there, and he used velvet to line the inside up. He made it with velvet, hand put in kind of a material that when the case closes, it fits right in the middle of the reed. See, the reeds are loose, not like on the reed guard where you get impressions. It's very bad for the reed, those impressions. Just let it hang loose, and he put this on, all leather and velvet, and the hinges work perfectly, and such a master of wood, it's warped. He warped the wood so air can get into the case. Master. And just to meet someone named Johannes was crazy. And I just really enjoyed it very much. And I show this to you because just the workmanship is so fine, it relates to legato. Spending the time. And after he spent a couple of days working on this for me, he came to the point where I figured it was time to pay him. And I said to myself, God, I don't know, what's a man's time worth? At least $5, $10 an hour? Work so many hours on it? Just the materials cost money. $10 he cut for it. And then I mailed it to him because I was broke at the time. Right. Well, I go on from here. I mentioned Ambrose Clark. I talked about Tempo Watch. I talked about several people that I feel you should listen to and try and get recordings of. And I go on to another thing now, a point that is also important. I own a quite extensive clarinet. Besides all the music, my house looks like a sloppy library. I own a tremendous amount of mouthpieces. I did most of my clarinet study before I was 21 years old. I stopped studying at 21 formally with a clarinet instructor, and occasionally I have played for former teachers and now friends and colleagues. But I just felt that I had to grow on my own, and I did this through making a study as much as I could of the clarinet. I didn't get so much into the upper joint, lower joint, because they're too expensive. But I was able to buy mouthpieces and I was able to buy barrels. So, after years and years of meeting clarinetists from all over, I managed to have a collection now of mouthpieces that are quite interesting, and several of them I brought here to show you people. One of the mouthpieces that I have, this is an old Henry Shedville. This is the same mouthpiece Harold Rhett uses. This is a Henry Shedville. How many people heard of the Shedville mouthpieces here? Everybody. Okay. You can't get them. I keep these in a vault, by the way. They go in a bank, in a vault, because there's nothing in my house that's worth anything except my mouthpiece. This mouthpiece is very interesting. These are, I'm not sure if they were brothers or an uncle and a nephew, Henry and Charles. I think they were brothers, but I'm not sure. And they were in the States. In fact, they supplied in Paris the mouthpieces for Selmer. Many people don't know this, but Shedville blanks, even though they were not faced by the Shedville people, they were Shedville blanks. And Selmers, for several years, bought their blanks from Shedville. Very fine old rubber. Pure rod rubber. Not pure junk that most of the blanks today are being made with. You can't get no resonance in the sound. That's why you've heard this mystery about Shedvilles. By the way, many are bad. Many Shedvilles are bad, but they have the sound. I never played a Shedville that didn't have a beautiful sound. I played Shedvilles that were terribly out of tune. I played Shedvilles that squeak. I played Shedvilles that had the registers were not balanced, but they had a quality, a timbre that was always good. Another mouthpiece I have here, which is an incredibly old mouthpiece, which I think this one was obtained from Ralph McLean to Dave Weber. This is a Charles Shedville with the 8 facing that McLean used. They're sort of like holy things, like he's been cushioned in a nice bed. And I bring these up because today there are good mouthpieces available. Every company occasionally hits a real special one. And you should look for the quality of the sound where possible if you desire that sound. If you desire another kind of a sound, then this is the wrong route to go. If you want to study Zen, or you want to go study Buddhism, or whatever religion, you go in that area. Clarinet playing and styles are like a religion. It's a deep spiritual conviction. A man who spends his whole life 3, 4, 5, the really crazy ones, 6, 7 hours a day with it, that's got to be a religion. Because nobody gets paid back for the time. Nobody does it for the money. Money is secondary. It's important in our society to make a living, but you will never be reimbursed for your time practicing thirds for 4 hours a day. You're just not going to. But the moment when you play a note pretty, and somebody comes up to you after a concert and says, "You moved me," somehow or another, that's just as important as the American buck. I brought these mouthpieces and I talked about Shedville because I think everybody should know about it. And I have several here, Selmer mouthpieces. These are old Selmer mouthpieces that have very excellent sounds. I have over here there's a very interesting story behind this mouthpiece I own. I'd also like to show you this case, which is also a work of art. This is a mouthpiece that, see, all my mouthpieces have a lot of dead lip on it, that you can't take off. and I'm afraid to dip it in Listerine it'll come off if you dip it in Listerine, but I'm afraid it might take some of the tone out. Because I remember in Marlborough, when I was up there, when Harold washed his mouthpiece out with a little brush, he's nervous for a week that he washed the tone out. Which I'm sure 95% of it is up here, but I'd rather have the dirt on it and not take any chances. This is a mouthpiece that probably nobody here ever saw. And I brought it because I think it's important that you know your heritage, where mouthpieces have come from. This is a gold dot Selmer mouthpiece, which Tony Rooley from the Selmer Corporation said, "Man, where'd you get that?" It's made of pure soft rod rubber, and the inscription is much different on the mouthpiece. And it's very interesting to note in these old mouthpieces, they all have longer bores. All of the mouthpieces and this is very important, I hope that somebody writes this down. The old mouthpieces were between 2 1/4 inches and 2 1/2 inches in length, the chamber. See, the new Selmer mouthpieces are so short, they're very sharp. Has anybody experienced in the Selmer mouthpieces, they're sharp in pitch? You noticed it? It's because, the main reason is because the bore is too short. Now, there's a very simple tool that I have that measures the size of the bottom part of the bore and the barrel. I'm talking about equipment, and then I will ask you if you would like me to, I would. You see, the barrel and the mouthpiece, obviously, I am not scientific about it. Other than this tool and the couple of Eric Brand mouthpiece gauges, I use no other tools. Because I don't like getting hung up, and I like to be with the instrument. I don't like it to become a fetish, continually looking for the impossible, or the Greek myth Sisyphus, the unattainable, and then when you attain it, it's not so great anyhow. But this bore gauge, it was made for me in New York. I put it into the mouthpiece, and it tells me a taper. It's not even important to know the number. The Hans Mennig gauge doesn't have numbers on it. Everybody just puts a scrape on it. This one is measured 575, 580, 1/100th of an inch taper. Very sensitive tool. It's not that expensive, and you can purchase it in New York. I don't know the address, but it's been made by Saul, S-A-U-L, Fromkin, Fromkin. I only know the street it's on. It's on West 49th Street in Manhattan. And it's a tool that's not expensive, and I think worth the investment, just from the standpoint of having something to use as a gauge to measure things. So I have the mouthpiece, and it's very interesting to note on the old mouthpieces, they have pretty big bores at the bottom. The old Shedvilles have pretty big fat bores. And one thing that's very interesting, well, since I'm standing over here, Ray, I'd like you to wiggle this tool inside the mouthpiece. Unwiggable. It doesn't wiggle. Something like that. Incredible. Incredible. I put it into most of the new mouthpieces, and it wiggles. It does the twist. Perfect taper. Incredible. I mean, anybody would just try and wiggle it.
It's unwiggable. Dead tight.
Marvin, I knew would come up with a new expression. Dead tight. It's interesting to note. Now, what does this have to do with it? Then, the only other thing that I get into, and I live right near the buffet factory. Bill Davis's daughter's a student of mine, former student of mine, from the buffet company. So it's so simple for me to go over and try 60 clarinets. And I find out that pretty much, most of them are pretty much the same. Occasionally get a really fine one. But in the barrels and the mouthpieces, that's where you can only find a few really good ones. This barrel was made for me, but I was in on the design of it. In fact, there's a student here who knew about it when I did this about 7 years ago. This is a barrel, a pre-World War II barrel. Now, again, this is me talking. I'm not talking for the world. I'm just talking for myself. This barrel is very light. The great violins, the Stradivari, Guarneri, were light. And the barrel, I found from experimentation, the lighter the barrel, the more vibrant the tone gets. I made a study of this, and the lighter the weight of the barrel, the more vibrant the clarinet sound is. And I had to balance out, because the clarinet, I like a heavy clarinet, but I like a light barrel, and what I had put on are silver rings to add some weight to the top part of the clarinet, so it felt like it had some weight on the top part. Very light, yes.
Larry, we're about 15 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then I better summarize. I'm sorry, Keith. So I'd like to summarize by saying that in terms of the bore of the barrel, the top part and the bottom part have obviously two spots to measure, but on most bad barrels, the measurements are the same. On most barrels, the tapers are the same. And I like a very resistant barrel. And now you look at the barrel, and the top part is the thin part, and the bottom part is the wider part. But everybody assumes that the bore is bigger on the bottom because it's fatter over here, but it's just the opposite. The top part of the barrel should be tighter, should be larger than the bottom part of the barrel. I see Keith smiling. I'm sure he's done this also. Most bad barrels, you will find sometimes the measurements are reversed, or the same, or the taper is just a little bit different. For me, I like a nice, tight bottom part to the barrel. And I feel at this time, I hope I was able to express during this week some of my feelings, because the reason that I chose the word expressionism in 20th century music was because of the composers that I was talking about, but the word expressionism has to do with art. And the barrel and the mouthpiece have to do with expressionism. Anything that allows you to play more beautiful is part of expressionism. So therefore, I consider this important means to an end, which is the art of playing notes with an artistic sense. I'd like to thank you all. I had an enjoyable time this week.